Hey, what's happening, guys? This is Rob of Rule of Two Review. Welcome back to the channel, and wouldn't you know it, a new rumor that seems pretty plausible has finally popped up telling us that yes, we will indeed see a new Nintendo Switch this year. So I know I'm a couple of days late to the party on this story, which is crazy because this is a huge story and something I would have loved to have covered right away in the moment. I usually would with something this big because it is so specifically focused on Nintendo and the Switch. But it's been a crazy week and I had a very busy weekend, and I of course wanted to cover Sony's State of Play thing, so I had to push this back a couple of days. And so you've heard 1,000 people talk about it, you've all seen the rumors at this point. But man, I have so many opinions on this, obviously, and so I really was excited to dive into it. And so what we're talking about, again, a rumor you guys know from several days ago. Apparently, the Wall Street Journal, of all places, is reporting that, yes, we're going to see a new Nintendo Switch this year, but beyond that, they're stating that it's going to be two Nintendo Switches. One would be a Switch Pro, and one would be a Switch Mini. And of course, this story goes back for a long time. I mean, people started talking about the idea of some sort of new Nintendo Switch or Super Nintendo Switch or a Nintendo Switch Pro since last year in 2018. And I, of course, discussed those rumors when those happened as well. Then there was also a story that came out just from a quote or a random prediction from Michael Pachter, where he stated he thought that Nintendo would do something like a Nintendo Switch Mini, something that would be a portable, not a portable Switch, because the Switch is portable, but a handheld-only kind of Switch device, which is something that when I discussed that prediction and theory of his, I stated I don't really believe in. But I always left room for it to be true, and while nothing is confirmed, the fact that it's being discussed now certainly is interesting. So first, let's get into a couple of quotes that I found from Nintendo Life's article covering the Wall Street Journal story. Here is a couple of statements that they said about what apparently is going on. As previously hinted, one of these versions will be a cheaper model that could well remove the detachable Joy-Con altogether, making it more akin to a 3DS successor. The Wall Street Journal says that the HD Rumble feature will be absent from this model, which is why the famous Joy-Con might not be a feature. It is expected that this could launch as early as next summer. The second, more expensive device will apparently have, quote, enhanced features targeted at avid video gamers. While details on this Pro model haven't been released, one of the sources, the Wall Street Journal has spoken to stated that it was more than just a simple revision, like the new Nintendo 3DS, so we could see a significant power boost. So there you go, pretty simple and straightforward, really laying out the very concept that we already understand, a Switch Mini and a Switch Pro. So to touch on the Switch Mini thing for a minute, just this whole idea to me is very interesting because, you know, one of my more recent videos from last week, I was discussing how long Nintendo may be making Switch-type consoles and devices, and a lot of that conversation is predicated on just how long the current Nintendo Switch, the one we all have from 2017, is meant to be their front-facing hardware. Because at some point, they will move on from the Nintendo Switch in every way that we know it, you guys. We have to just acknowledge that. That's how consoles have been forever, whether they're handhelds or consoles, and in this case, a hybrid. It's still going to happen. We're going to move on. And so the idea of now introducing one or even two new updated versions of the Switch, basically Nintendo's version of a mid-gen refresh, very much impacts the idea of how long the Switch will be the front-facing hardware, because this might be adding another couple of years onto the life that it wouldn't have otherwise had. So again, if we go back to the Switch Mini thing, as I stated when I covered Pachter's prediction on this very idea, I never really liked the idea, and I never really believed Nintendo would do it. And that really didn't have anything to do with whether or not I wanted one myself. Just because I don't want one doesn't have anything to do with whether or not I believed it. It just didn't truly make sense to me for Nintendo to make a Switch Mini that no longer switches, it doesn't, quote, switch anymore, and then removes the Joy-Cons and the HD Rumble and all of these features that are really unique to what the Switch is. Now, to be fair, some other people, including a fellow friend of mine and YouTuber Smash JT, made a really good point that Nintendo did set this precedent with the 3DS, where that was named the 3DS because of the 3D, and then Nintendo pulled the 3D out of it and released something called a 2DS, where they pulled out the main feature that was the namesake of the device and changed it to something else and changed the name. And it's a very, very good point that I cannot deny the truth of. And so maybe that does lead us to believe that, yes, Nintendo would release a Switch Mini, and maybe even just change the name of it since it no longer can switch. But I think that part of my theory in not really believing the idea of a Switch Mini is just the fact that with the Switch, I think it felt different than what they had with the 3DS. And I didn't think that Nintendo really would have seen much of a market to, you know, I know they could sell it for $50 or $100 less, and suddenly you have a $199 device that just is portable only and doesn't have Joy-Cons and all that. And that maybe kids who couldn't otherwise have a Switch would suddenly have access to it because of doing it this way. I never really felt like there is much of a market because, as I said in my previous video, I don't really see a lot of kids and parents and just families and people struggling to buy Nintendo Switches for their kids. I've seen plenty of kids out in the world playing Switches. I don't really think anyone cares about that. And Switches continually are selling like crazy. They're constantly like battling for #1 in the NPD and in Media Create. Like, they're doing well. They're selling Switches like crazy. They're selling software like crazy. It doesn't seem like there's an untapped market. So why do something like this? However, it's not like I don't want to see what this thing would be like and what it would look like and if the market would react. And now that these rumors are starting to make it seem true, it's like, hey, maybe, I mean, clearly I could have been wrong on that prediction. Although, there's also a world where Nintendo does release like a mini version of the Switch where the Joy-Cons don't detach, but maybe it could still be played on a TV. And if that's the case, then we wouldn't have a handheld-only Switch, a dockless Switch. If there's a way to play this thing on a TV, then it technically would fall under the category of my prediction that Nintendo wouldn't release a handheld-only Switch. Now, the Switch Pro? That is a whole different can of worms, and definitely something that would be more exciting to me, you know? I mean, you can call me that, quote, avid gamer that Nintendo Life article stated, or I guess Wall Street Journal would have stated. But whatever you want to call me, you know, a dedicated, hardcore, lifelong gamer, whatever. Yeah, the idea of a Switch Pro, something that's adding to the Switch, not taking away from it, like the idea of the Switch Mini, that gets me excited. Because if they're enhancing features and they're adding power and capability to the device, that does become interesting to me. Not because I'm like a graphics whore or any of that stuff, but because I do like powerful machines and I want my Nintendo device to be able to play as many games as possible. And part of the rumors in the past surrounding a Switch Pro had to do with maybe certain games that couldn't play on the current Switch would then be possible and come to the new Switch. And so a game like a Resident Evil 2 or a Red Dead Redemption 2, for example, would have maybe already released on this Switch Pro because the Switch Pro would be capable of doing it. Now, I'm not somebody who needs my current Switch to do anything more. I'm not like a needy, demanding, entitled kind of gamer. I love the Switch as it is. It's one of my like top 5 favorite consoles of all time, probably. At least top 10. And so I'm not like sad about what it does and what games it has or not. I mean, I think it's absolutely incredible. But if you add something significant to it that to me seems valuable, then if it's sold for the right price, I would absolutely consider double dipping if it does and gives things that I would like that the current Switch doesn't offer me. I mean, I absolutely would, especially if what that is certain games. I think it would be weird and a shame if Nintendo wanted to segregate the market in this way on top of the Switch Mini. They'd have a regular Nintendo Switch, they'd have a Switch Mini with no Joy-Cons and no TV play, they'd have a Switch Pro with a specific set of library and certain games that are playable only on that, but not on the other 2 models. I mean, think about it, you're segregating your market in like 3 or 4 different ways, and it's just becomes this big old confusing mess, and typically Nintendo doesn't like to do that stuff. They don't usually try to confuse their market and their consumer base. They're very straightforward and simple in that respect, and I think it's why their business models traditionally are successful. Sometimes they haven't been successful, but usually they have been, and when they have been, it's because they're simple. And so this whole rumor about 2 models and certain libraries for the Switch Pro, it just becomes messy. Does that mean that this rumor isn't true? I mean, no, I'm not going to say that. I'm certainly willing to believe it. And as I even stated in a video a few months ago, I was, and I have been, starting to come around on the idea of a Switch Pro. Not the Switch Mini, but the Switch Pro, yeah, I started to believe in it. And plenty of other people and YouTubers I know, Super Metal Dave and Review Tech USA, they did a live stream discussing it. You know, and some other people who I won't name behind the scenes, a lot of people do certainly believe that this thing exists. And I have no reason to trust anyone or to doubt anyone. I'm kind of just you know, despite the fact that I have access to sources, I very rarely tap people for information because that's not really my approach and what I'm trying to do with my YouTube channel and the small bit of notoriety I have. Sometimes stuff comes to me, and so I do know of a couple of things behind the scenes that are certainly pretty big news stories, but I'm not interested in discussing them until they become public news, and I'm not interested in trying to sniff out stuff. When people bring me stuff, I think that's great, and I'm always appreciative to know things ahead of time, but you know, so anyway, I'm getting sidetracked. The point is, when I attach that to the idea of people I know who believe behind the scenes that this thing exists, I have no reason to doubt them. Just like I have no reason to necessarily trust the Wall Street Journal either. So I'm just kind of just letting it all come at me the way it's going to come at me naturally, man. I'm not worried about trying to know what's going to happen ahead of time. If somebody brings me something concrete and then I know it to be a fact, I'll be like, wow, check it out, that is real. And then I'll just wait for it to become public knowledge, and then I'll discuss it at that time, like I do with, you know, most stories that I find out about ahead of time. So, you know, this is just it's a weird thing. You know, it's very interesting to see Nintendo doing this. And it's exciting not because I necessarily want either of these devices, but because it just represents a huge shakeup and a big change and new hardware and coming from Nintendo. And what does it all mean for Nintendo's place in the industry and the industry at large? Like, that stuff is always fascinating to me, you guys. You know, that's why I talk about these things. So that's what's going on, and those are my kind of thoughts and opinions on the idea of a Switch Mini and a Switch Pro coming out possibly this year in 2019. What a crazy world we live in. What do you guys think about this? Do you believe these rumors? Do you not? Do you want to see these devices, or do you not want to see these devices? And how do you think this fits into the larger picture of Nintendo and the Switch, and how long the Switch may or may not last? Discuss all of this stuff below, and this video is a wrap. Thanks, of course, as always, for tuning in, guys. This is Rob of Rule of Two Review, and I'll catch you next time on another video.